Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the Redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as a reminder, when we say go green on this program, we ain't talking about mere environmentalism. We're talking about something deeper, deep ecology, the interconnectedness of all of life. And whether you come at that from an eco spiritual feminist perspective, or you come at that from a hard science Western perspective, or like me, you say those are both perfectly valid ways of understanding the world. I'm here to tell you we are all connected in this web of life, and whatever we as humans do to that web, we ultimately do to ourselves. And y'all, we got to be honest, we doing it wrong. We're literally destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself, and we are creating a racist, sexist class order with the plunder. And on that cheery note, as always, let's bring in our good pal Shane Knight. Shane, how you doing, brother?
And I'm doing all right, David. It's
Looky
another
here,
typical
man.
Monday.
It is a Monday, and it's also we got to really be clear about what's happening in the world today, because if we don't, like, we are teetering on absolute disaster. First, obviously, the big story, the continuing illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional war in Iraq. And I want to be clear that Trump's war, it's the neoliberal empire's war, and it's Israel's war. And Iran is firing back. We're talking about thousands of strikes. We're talking about thousands of innocent civilians being murdered and killed. We're talking about an escalating regional war. And Shane, my read, we are teetering on the beginning of World War III. And as if that's not insane enough, because the Strait of Hormuz, which is literally the checkpoint for the global oil supply, it is now being shut off. Energy prices are spiking everywhere, and it's just begun. It's going to get a lot worse, a lot quicker. Shane, looky here, man. This is what the experts call a polycrisis. ICE is
That's it.
being
Yeah.
dispatched to U.S. airports. We've got a potential World War III. We've got a world record breaking heat wave across the entire continental United States. Man, things are nuts. And if you feel like I'm overreacting, pull me off this ledge, man, because this looks crazy to me.
I'm right there with you. I've spent, I think I said earlier, yes, I feel like I've been in was it the bottom of the belly of the bulge of the boat of despair because of all of this. And then you put on top of it all the economic pressure that's coming from all of this. And it's a lot. And yes, I think you're right in your assessment. It's the threat level is through the roof. But at the same time, I look around and I still see signs of hope. You know, I think we mentioned a little bit about it last week with the Ford caught fire in the laundry room. That's the aircraft carrier with about 4,600 sailors aboard. And in lieu of the lack of bedding due to the fire and the effects of all that fire, which they fought the fire. I didn't even know this. For like 10 days, the sailors fought this fire inside the boat itself. They lost their racks, and now they're half of them. Well, half of them, about 400 people, 400 sailors that are sleeping in the cafeteria. So I know they're not having a good time. But considering that just weeks prior, when they had to pull or they had to slow down the boat so they could do minimal repair work on the tubes where the sewer and the toilets drain through the boat, then we found out that the reason that they had to do that was because the sailors had been flushing relatively questionable items down the toilet, like T-shirts and socks. So I don't know. I think they're showing signs of like, hey, we're not here to fight this war for Israel. And I've spoken to a couple of people who are active duty Marines right now. And I don't know, they've activated the Second Marine Expeditionary Unit, um, and they're en route. That's another 2,500 Marines out there going to, probably try to take over some island there in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll see, but they're not too happy about it either. They do describe it as Israel's war and how they're not really into dying for Israel. That's not what they signed up to do. That they didn't give an oath to the Constitution of Israel. They gave an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And unfortunately, uh, they're still going to have to go, I don't know, shell it out for a few days. Looks like Trump is already backing it back. He's seeing the economic fallout of all of this and doesn't want to be blamed for it. But you're right. We are teetering. We are teetering. But at the same time, there are pockets of hope. People are collectively coming together and communities are coming together, and what people are putting together in place to deal with the economic fallout of all of this is not only impressive, but it does give rise to hope. And I got to hang on to that.
Well, brother, thank you for that. And I'm reminded early on, whenever you and I first started this program together, Shane, you talked about running towards each other. And I remember that comment. It stuck with me then. It still rings in my ears. And I'm here to tell you, y'all, if we don't show up for each other, nobody else will. Government ain't going to save us. Corporations damn sure ain't going to save us. Today, more than ever, we got to come together. We got to protect each other. We got to do mutual aid. We got to make sure our communities can not only survive and thrive. And that's what Redneck Gone Green is always about. And today we got a great guest to really go deep on exactly that. Rob Persons is somebody I first met when he was a graduate student at the City University of New York in the Community and Worker Ownership Project, CWOP. I know he went on to work with the Westchester Cooperative Network. He's also now the Director of Development at the Institute for Social Ecology, really one of the key groups that has been at the forefront of developing and grappling the theoretical framework of dual power and municipalism. Rooted in the tradition of Murray Bookchin, the Institute has long argued that ecological survival and real grassroots democracy go hand in hand. And in fact, that you can't have one without another. So it is with that I'm really excited to bring onto this program my friend, Rob Persons. Rob, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Howdy, David. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for that nice introduction.
You know, Rob, I know you, again, as a friend and a comrade, but I want to give you an opportunity to tell what I think of as your personal superhero community organizer origin story. So what were the experiences that you lived through that really shaped your political consciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I really came in through the environmental movement. Growing up, I was never an explicitly kind of political person or even a social justice oriented person, growing up in my early years. But I always loved being outside. I always loved nature. I loved, felt, connection and whatnot. And then really when I started learning about the severity of the ecological crisis in AP Environmental Studies class in high school, I was really shocked and appalled that this scale of crisis was not the number one issue that everyone was talking about all the time and wasn't, leading global cooperation to address this existential crisis, and really had a difficult time kind of wrapping my head around that. And so I decided to study that in school, and I, went off and was, Obama supporter, liberal type, thought that, people just weren't informed enough and we just needed to share information, because if people were aware that this was such a big issue, they would of course do something, and our, institutions, which are based around democracy and all these things that we hear about in, history class, and all the things that we pat our back, as Americans, that we pat ourselves on the back for, I believed in, and, thought we just needed, cap and trade or some of these policies. And, as I studied it more, I came to see that even the people that were talking about it in kind of mainstream politics were not, the policies that they were advancing were nowhere near what was actually needed to address the crisis. And, and then I started becoming interested in things like B corporations that were like kind of doing voluntary measures to, behave better as corporations, or GPI, which stands for gross product indicator, which if we just measured the economy different as opposed to GDP, which, whether you get an ice cream cone or whether your mother's sick from cancer, like it both leads to economic growth, as if it's just, transactions under GDP is what is what grows the economy. I thought, oh, well, if we just shift it to GPI, which takes a more holistic view, that will solve things. But what I came to realize is that fundamentally it is the capitalist mode of production that is driving the ecological crisis. And from that moment, and the backdrop of this is, the Ferguson protests with, the emergence of Black Lives Matter, the Standing Rock uprising and protests, Bernie Sanders 2016 presidential run. And I, my belief in the system really kind of evaporated, and I began to see how all of the social crises around, racism, patriarchy, violence, imperialism were connected in the ecological crisis. And, in order to do so, we would need to create transformational movements to overcome these things.
Well, this is, thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate that. And I also want to lift up and appreciate your acknowledgement about your own trajectory. And that is, none of us know what we don't know. And almost everybody, like at some point, has this realization that we've been lied to, and I think back to Mrs. Armstrong, my third grade teacher, right? And she's the one who convinced me, like, America is this great shining light on the hill. And not only that, like, we were a democracy and we were going to lead the rest of the world to democracy. And I was so proud to be an American. And it took me quite some time to realize that I had, in fact, been lied to. But you know what, Rob? It wasn't the kind of lie where Mrs. Armstrong didn't go to bed at night saying, I can't wait till these little children come into my room. I'm going to fill their lives full of lies and propaganda. No, see, she taught that creation myth of the U.S. because she believed it. And it worked on me and my other classmates. And I reckon it worked on you and everybody listening to us when we're children, because we want to believe it. See, we want liberty, justice, and equality. I'll do you one better. We deserve it. And that's true of American children, but it's also true for Palestinian children and Jewish children and Iranian children and Venezuelan children. See, that's something that we all deserve. And what I want to understand from you is, Rob, do you have a moment where it all clicked for you, or was it a series of things where you said, this is all bullshit? Like, do you understand? Like, I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah. So I guess it had been a series of things kind of ramping up to this point, but kind of as it was, as all these things were happening, Standing Rock and, all the pieces were being put together for me. I took a class with Brian Tokar from the Institute for Social Ecology, who was teaching at the University of Vermont at the time. And he introduced me to social ecology. And, I was also, at the same time as I was becoming, increasingly sure that we needed social transformation, I was also always interested in philosophy. And then, becoming introduced to the works of Murray Bookchin, it kind of put all the pieces together for me. And, I felt like, because before I was like, well, capitalism may have flaws, but so did the Soviet Union. Really, can we, I wasn't fully ready to take that next step into the system is bad, but it's what we got to, we need a new system, because I didn't know how to understand what a new system could look like and what a new system could be. And then I feel like that's what social ecology kind of helped me see and help me take that next step.
Well, you see, I think part of the problem too is people don't understand that there is such a thing as a quote unquote system. Who Murray Bookchin, is that how you say his name? I'm not an academic. I went to college for creative writing and advertising, and that's what I did. But I'm curious, like, his name sounds familiar. As almost, was he an anarchist that also
for a long time? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I was tracking. Wrote a lot of books. Yeah.
He did. Murray Bookchin. Yeah. He also actually wasn't an academic, as a self-educated intellectual, who grew up in the Bronx, New York, and ended up moving to Vermont. Yeah, it's so yeah, he's a really interesting figure because he grew up in the kind of old left, communist movement, but then became an anarchist and then developed the ideas of social ecology and eventually broke from anarchism. But that's still kind of a debate among social ecologists. And you have, anarchist leaning social ecologists, or social ecologists who are anarchists, anarchist leaning social ecologists, Marxist leaning social ecologists. There's all these different kind of currents within social ecology. So it's certainly not a monolithic view. But
So thank you for that, Shane. And I think Ruthie already threw it up on the screen, but I want to lift up Steve Breedlove, who is a frequent listener, viewer, participant, who says social ecology is at the core of my own ideology, but I struggle to see a path to get there. And that really is a great segue, Rob, because I want you to describe what is your current role at the Institute for Social Ecology and tie it to how the Institute was actually like evolved out of the writing. Because as you say, Murray Bookchin was not an academic. He was like an unusual character that came out of that. So I guess what I'd invite you to do is talk about the founding of ISE as you understand it, and then segue into your role at ISE.
Sure. Yeah. So social ecology is a kind of body of ideas. Kind of the backdrop of it is you have in the kind of 1960s and 70s this really exciting new left movement kind of devolving a little bit into factionalism and then lifestyleism of the kind of counterculture movement becoming becomes this consumer movement, and a lot of the exciting stuff gets defanged. You also have the environmental movement taking a very liberal trajectory in which it's is not really containing a revolutionary politics, and the revolutionary organizations at that time, especially the Marxist ones, didn't really see the environment as a core issue. You also have explicitly reactionary ecological thoughts who say population is kind of the metric that's causing the ecological crisis, while letting million and billionaires off the hook, while blaming people suffering from famine as equally for the ecological crisis as the people who are causing the famine through the global imperialist system. But so social ecology is addressing these kind of currents in environmental thought by saying human nature is not inherently anti-ecological, but it is through systems of social domination that emerged that we learn to dominate nature, that through the creation of this of kind of monarchies and then capitalism, we kind of shifted our view of nature to become a pool of resources to extract from. And the upshot of that is, because human nature is not inherently anti-ecological, we can harmonize ourselves with nature if we overcome these forms of social domination. And the Institute was really founded to experiment with these ideas, to put the ideas of social ecology into practice in Vermont, which is where it was founded, to experiment with eco-technologies such as solar and wind and permaculture practices in agriculture, while examining anthropological studies of past histories, while developing feminist theory and feminist critiques of capitalism, of patriarchy, of the status quo, and giving people an opportunity to put the ideas into practice in their lives.
So, one thing and thank you, Shane, for that good pointed question. I really appreciate that. And Rob, for your, what I thought was a brilliant answer. And I reckon for me, one of the things that's really important is that Bookchin was at the very early stages. For many of us now, it's obvious, right? Many of us describe ourselves as either eco-socialists or Like there's a lot of different flavors, but at the time, Bookchin was trying to do something that I think was really to say it's not either or, it's both and. What I really appreciated about Bookchin were a couple of things. One, his commitment that we had to red the greens, but also green the reds, right? Like to him, it was not, it wasn't either or, as you so beautifully said, both and. The other thing was like to go out to Vermont and say, let's put this into practice best we can. Uh, so I do want to really push you, Rob, on the Institute for Social Ecology, the early days of efforts to connect theory to real world organizing, because I really want to point out that the way I look at it, Rob, you're part of a new generation of new, younger leadership. That it really does feel like there has been a huge shift from what I knew of the ISE to what I'm seeing today.
Yeah,
we're having
absolutely.
a moment of technical difficulty too.
Okay.
Let's see, Rob. Why don't you try coming out? Yeah, there you go. We got an error message saying Rob was no longer being recorded, that his browser storage was full. So we're just going to let him slide out for a moment and come back and answer that question.
Right on. Thank you for that, Shane, and appreciate the patience of our Redneck Gone Green community. I've seen a lot of good and interesting things coming on within the comments. So, we're going to do our best with the technology that's available to us. But at the end of the day, it does tell me, Shane, that we might have to figure out a new platform here because well, I'd like to
this
make
is 3 weeks in a row, I believe.
it really is, right? So we got like y'all stay with us, be patient with us. Rob is coming back in. We're gonna pick up that conversation back where we are. Rob Persons, you back with us?
Yeah, right. Sorry about that.
All good.
Can you restate your question?
Sure. What I was interested in is you talking about how the experiment in Vermont was an effort to connect theory to real world organizing, and it started in Vermont. And I reckon that I am perceiving that you and a whole group of other young people are now in leadership over at ISE. It really does feel like y'all are in a moment of transition there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that since, I think around 9/11, a lot of left movements took a real hit where kind of the patriotism around that kind of emerged post after that kind of was a tough organizing environment for many radical movements. And, it really wasn't until, so there was kind of a decline in social ecology, attention around social ecology in that early 2000s period. But since around 2011, with the emergence of Occupy Wall Street and with the beginning of the revolution in Rojava, in which one of their kind of ideological leaders, Abdullah Öcalan, the Kurdish freedom fighter who was imprisoned currently in solitary confinement in Turkey, explicitly cited Murray Bookchin as one of his ideological inspirations, that these movements kind of created a lot of renewed attention in the ideas of social ecology that kind of revitalized the Institute in many ways. And the Institute has subsequently shifted a lot of its programming online since losing its physical campus. And yes, there's certainly kind of from that kind of cohort of newly engaged folks been a crop of folks, who have become kind of more central to the operations of the Institute, though very much kind of the historic leadership remains involved in a very, engaged capacity. And, I think social ecology has always been a very intergenerational movement. Murray Bookchin was the movement elder in the kind of early days of the ISE as kind of like the, and today that, many of the movement elders and Institute continue to play that role. But it is exciting to see younger people come up and kind of take more responsibility.
One of the things about the Institute for Social Ecology as an organization and the social ecology specifically really is the idea of municipalism. And it doesn't mean, oh, let's elect people at the municipal level, although Murray was very clearly a proponent of engaging in local elections. But it goes deeper because Bookchin and other practitioners really said municipalism is about governing ourselves at the local level. And then he had this vision of building confederated networks of democratic communities that come together. And of course, I would argue we haven't really seen much of the confederation of networks of democratic communities, but I do appreciate that there is a clarity around the need for deep ecology, the need for real democracy, and the fact that the neoliberals of and the empire builders of the two major parties are not going to lead us into that. I also appreciate that y'all have begun to do something at the Institute for Social Ecology that y'all call the summer intensives. Tell us what a ISE summer intensive is.
Yeah. So I think they were originally kind of created to kind of capture some of the magic that we used to have around our like entire summer programs, in which you're bringing people together to learn, to political education, to put ideas into practice, and kind of condense it into 1 week in this intensive format. But really, what they are week-long convenings that bring people together, movement-based people together for a week of popular education, for movement building, relationship building, and kind of strategy building, strategy formation, in which we, organize with a local co-host. It changes the location each year, and we kind of co-create a theme with our local co-hosts, and then we draw in people from their immediate area, the region, and our broader social ecology network to create this effervescence of movement people from a broad array of backgrounds, areas, focuses, and create a kind of cohesive, but wide-ranging program that folks engage with for a full week. And some people who have attended these intensives have described them as life-changing, as you are encountered with new ideas and meet such amazing people and are inspired. And as we're in this extremely scary and frightening moment globally, coming to these events where you can meet the people who are doing something different and putting the ideas into practice is really important for us to maintain our motivation and inspiration.
Well, Rob, first of all, we're going to take a moment to say, y'all, you are listening and or viewing Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb, joined as always by co-host Shane Knight. We are talking right now with Rob Persons, who is the development director of the Institute for Social Ecology. And we're about to go deep into the ISE's, one of their real signature efforts and offerings is called the Summer Intensive. And this year, the description itself is land and liberation, indigenous sovereignty, social ecology, and restoring right relations. And I do want to lift up that this year, the partnership that y'all have is with both Native Roots Network and the People's Network for Land and Liberation. Folks who watch this program, listen, know that I am active with the People's Network for Land and Liberation. So I want to be very clear, y'all. I'm going to be there. It's June 5th through 11 at Native Roots Network's land-based project, Wenham Toast in Shasta County, just outside of Reading. And again, y'all, this is an in-person, in-depth gathering where participants really grapple with these ideas in a very real way. Like I like to say, it's stated plainly, this is not an academic conference. It's political grappling, and it's also strategy. Rob, I'd like you to take a moment to say, why did the Institute for Social Ecology choose Native Roots Network and the People's Network for Land and Liberation to be your co-sponsors this year and your partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're always looking to partner with folks that we see at the forefront of building a transformational movement. And that certainly describes PNLL, People's Network for Land and Liberation, as well as Native Roots Network. It's a big priority for us to choose a venue that folks can not only attend the program during the day, but also remain engaged at night as well. And at this year's intensive, we're as a land-based project, we're going to have folks camping out, where a lot of the conversations that and sessions that are happening during the day are carried forward at night as well, and kind of in some of the informal spaces where people get to deepen their relationships and deepen their analysis as they continue to engage with the topics. And also, I think a key reason is that we're very interested in the connection between land and liberation. And Native Roots Network is a node in PNLL in which they're connecting their land base to their practice of liberation. And we are not only going to be discussing this as a topic and kind of engaging this as a theory, but we're also going to be there, seeing it unfold before us and be part of its unfolding. So I think it's a really unique opportunity as a venue to not only get to talk about it, but to live it.
So, Rob, tell us a little bit more about how somebody might, if they are inspired by this, tell us how they could actually come and participate, and then if so, what they would actually experience for that week.
Thank you. That was my question.
Yeah. Let me drop the registration link into the chat. Actually, I need to. Well, maybe I should.
Drop it in the chat, in the studio chat, and either Ruthie or Shane will make sure that it ends up in the public one. So,
okay. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that shortly after I, wrap up this comment. So we're still putting together the program. So I don't have the full schedule of events yet, but folks, I know for sure are going to get a deep dive into social ecology as a theory and practice. They're going to get a session led by you, David, and we're hearing about the PNLL strategy. They're going to get sessions on grassroots organizing, indigenous struggle, ecological philosophy, environmental struggles that are going on, such as protests against dam construction, some stuff about restoring right relations. So what a liberated, relationship between human society and the natural world would look like. So I don't want to overpromise on specific session titles, because we're still very much, moving things around, but the date is June 5th to June 11th. So, well before then, thank you, Ruthie. There it is. Well before then, we will have the full program published. But right now we have the ISC, Native Roots Network, and PNLL signed on as co-sponsors. We're in conversation with a half dozen other organizations that we're bringing into the fold as partners. And then, last year's intensive in Lexington, Kentucky brought together over a dozen organizations. So I think it's safe to say that there will be a wide array of movement formations that are convening in this space.
I want to
can I ask a question? I'm sorry. I do want to get to Steve's comment, but I'm wanting to know what the outcome goal, let's say, for the participants. Is it for, am I going to walk away with it? I mean, you explained what, the overarching, and I get that you haven't got the track put together yet, but at the end of the day, am I going to walk away with it having a sense of how I can take what I learned here, go back to my community and say, this is what we need to do and why. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we
Cool.
are, yeah. And, you'll also meet people, you'll form friendships, you will, I'm still, first came to the ISC in 2018 and am still in touch with many of the people who I met back then who aren't involved in the ISC anymore. But, you're going to meet people who inspire you, and maybe you don't know what to do and you're not even part of an organization back in your community, but you're inspired by these ideas and you want to make a difference. Things aren't right, and you want to see how you can make a bigger impact. That's you if you come to this, you will directly engage with strategic sessions on movement strategy, with education and kind of analysis development. You'll develop your analysis, and you will engage with people who are at the forefront of doing it. So I'm always it's always a highlight of my year.
Go to Steve's comment.
Yeah, I will. I will point out also, Rob, you and I met. It wasn't a formal ISE summer intensive, but it was a partnership with the ISE where you and I first met. And so Steve says, I love that this gathering is being hosted in the heart of American Christian fascism. This is indeed a cosmic battle between the forces nurturing life and those of a messianic death cult. He's talking about Bethel Church, by the way. And I really do want to name it, including inviting Bethel to try to sue me, because truth is an absolute defense in any libel or slander case in this country. And at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we do come to terms with the fact that what we are experiencing now really is what Gramsci would call a battle for common sense, right? And by common sense, we don't mean can you tell the difference between shit and shinola. We talking about, like, we have, because of the systems that we live in, we have literally adopted corporate ideology. We have adopted corporate thinking. We have adopted power over dominator systems and just thought that that's what common sense really means. Like, well, everybody knows that X, Y, or Z. And the reality is, y'all, I think that it's important that we understand that there are really a difference between those who look at the natural world as basically commodity that we should extract, exploit, and make money off of, which is the corporate ideology, versus what we all knew and our ancestors knew before enclosure, before capitalism, before industrialism, and that is that Mother Nature is actually nurtures us. That nature is not something out there, it's actually everywhere. We are part of it. And I do think that that kind of cosmic battle of understanding and inviting people back into right relation with themselves, right relation with Mother Earth, right relation with their neighbors, and I'm going to say right relation with your own labor, right? Because at the end of the day, the capitalist has convinced us that work sucks and that we have to do it in order to get money. And I'm here to tell you that it's jobs that suck. Work is fantastic if we understand work to mean meaningful, productive activity for which we are respected and that we get meaning out of our lives for. And I'm going to end it with this, Rob, and I invite you to reflect on this. I reckon that people want to work. If by work you mean meaningful, productive activity for which you will be respected by others.
Absolutely. Yeah, that really is what kind of got me into the cooperative movement, and kind of there's a long history in the United States and globally of people recognizing that when you work for a wage, you're what you're literally doing is you're putting yourself up for rent. You're trading your time for someone else. And what And then in this country, it's deeply individualistic. The idea of entrepreneurship is very salient here because, I mean, not only do people want to see their individual vision, but they want to own their own time. But I think where a lot of the kind of I guess fetishized ideas about entrepreneurship kind of fall short is that it views your interest as opposed to everyone else's interest. Whereas what we need to be thinking about is how we can have communal interest and our interests in common. And that's what the cooperative movement is about. That's what the solidarity economy movement is about. And that's, so the practice of social ecology is literally called communalism. And it's about how do we democratically own the means to life? How do we democratically decide what resources and what things we should do? Should we be creating all this toxic material and food that's filled with all these extremely dangerous chemicals and are be so cut off from the land and so much and be so cut off from the processes of life? And what does it look like when not only do we control our labor, but we live in community with each other and with the natural world?
I love Floridon, who dropped into the chat. It's Eden, baby. Stewardship and sustainability. Right on. I love that. And then You Don't Like My Music drops in another gem. Tax capital, not labor. I'm curious, Rob, like, you've mentioned Rojava. So talk a little more about that as an example of social ecology in action. And then I'm going to invite you to talk about other examples, concrete examples of efforts to build that kind of communalism in practice.
Absolutely. So, not to get too deep into the social ecology theory, but basically the kind of core idea is that the force of domination that is at the root of the ecological crisis is overcome through the practice of direct democracy and communal democracy. So it puts the kind of social ecology calls for radical democracy. And many people say, direct democracy sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. It's a similar thing with communism, but and that's why we have representative democracy in many cases. It's like, oh, you can't manage the affairs of your community directly. But what Rojava, what Rojava shows, which for those who are unfamiliar, it is a autonomously administered region of north and east Syria, which gained autonomy in kind of the fallout of the Syrian civil war in 2011, in which the Assad regime lost its ability to control the entire country, and the largely Kurdish, the Kurdish people are an ethnic minority in the region, were able to create their own system for over 15 years, and have been managing over 4 million people through a system of direct democracy based around neighborhood councils and socialized ownership. Now that they're under severe attack right now with the new regime in Syria, but that's a whole other conversation that I don't think we have time to get into. But I want to share my solidarity with the Kurdish people and with Rojava, who Trump and the Americans who allied with to fight ISIS have completely abandoned to the fascist.
Gosh, it's almost as if empire is not actually serious when they say they're concerned about democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we will ally with the Saudis and then say we're supporting democracy somewhere else. So it's
I mean, look, here on Redneck Gone Green, y'all, we are unapologetic, proud anti-imperialist. Empire everywhere sucks, and we are against it, and always will be as long as I'm associated with Redneck Gone Green. Looky here, Rob, I want to make sure that we give you a chance to lift up any examples in the U.S. where you feel like social ecology is being practiced or at least experimented with in a way that folks should know about?
Yeah. Um, if we're looking for a fully realized version of social ecology in the United States, we're going to be disappointed, because there's not really a place where it is been actualized. But what I would look to is movements across the country right now. We're in the process of building some really exciting movements in the Pacific Northwest around this new neighbor union program, which we've launched. In which we are saying that, in order to, build a system of radical democracy in a context that's in a political context in which individualism and self-interest are so reified, what we need to do is build community. So, the neighbor union is an approach to build that community. I think, other examples of it, pop up during movement times are really part of the movement building approach. And I think that, if you look at many of the movements that have emerged in this country, they have kind of fitted back towards a democratic approach, whether that is in the civil rights movement, whether that is in the, anti-war movement, whether that is in the alter globalization movement or Occupy Wall Street, or the Black Lives Matter movement. Democratic forms always emerge in social movement contexts. And I think that is, like rivers, are always trying to change their course and fit their natural shape, which is to say that they are flexible and are not meant to be, contained, which is what we're doing to the Mississippi River right now. We're holding it in place, and it's fighting to get out of there. And I think that, in many ways, humans are like that, in which, democracy is our, natural state. I mean, that perhaps at least it's a state that we feel comfortable in. And I think that in social movements, we see the impulse towards that emerge.
Rob, I thank you. I'm so glad you literally have anticipated my next question, because I wanted to talk specifically about the neighbor union organizing cohort, which you touched on. But for me, the one of the things that I find so fascinating is this is like, people are familiar with organized labor or labor unions, but you're talking about neighbor unions. Like, tell us, like back up a moment and talk about where this idea came from and what it actually means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we're talking about radically restructuring society around directly democratic lines. Many people, I live on the Jersey Shore, and many folks around here are Trump supporters. Many folks have very reactionary views. Many folks, don't know about, don't know some of the kind of core elements of political education. And I think if we just immediately, create a system of direct democracy, a lot of people would implement very reactionary ideas. And not only that, so not only is it a process of education to get us to a place where we can, actualize this, but also many people who, don't have reactionary ideas, or maybe they have, some unanalyzed ideas that could be described as reactionary. We need to overcome isolation. And I think, even if people are aware that the system is rigged, that the, billionaire or the Epstein class are running the show, that, we have a system that, is undemocratic, that they don't know what to do. And, what we need to do is create, as organizers, as people in the movement, is create space to facilitate agency, to create organizations in which everyday people can go out into their direct communities, meet their neighbors, meet their community, recognize their common interests, and have a space to create action. Because we've been promised so many things by politicians, and And I think everyone's a little desensitized to, big ideas about things being very different because we've heard it all before. But what people, what will, I think, actually create a vehicle for putting these ideas into action is by creating space in everyday in community. And that's kind of what this is about.
One of the things that, like looky here, Ruthie and I both are from the Texas Gulf Coast. Shane, I knew, grew up in Mississippi. And one thing that I'm going to say is those of us who are in hurricane country, what we know is this. When that storm blows through, it don't matter who your neighbors are, we end up taking care of one another. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's actually called mutual aid. And we were really good at it, right? And it's like, what really gets me is anytime a natural disaster happens, anytime there is some really acute moment, ordinary folks' natural inclination is actually to turn to their neighbors and say, are you okay? How can I help? What's going on? And of course, those who are really on top of their game will have like a plan in place, and they'll have maybe they got some food stored, maybe they got something together. What I really appreciate about the social ecology approach to mutual aid is it pushes us to say we could live like this all the time. Am I getting that wrong, Rob? Oh heck, we just lost him again. I reckon.
Yeah, I think.
So Shane, what do you think, man? Am I going too far afield when I talk about the hurricanes that you and I lived through?
No. I think you're spot on. It's a great analogy. People really do have to come to the understanding that they have to run towards one another, like I say, especially in times of crisis. And like you said too, where there is natural disaster, human beings do it naturally. Rob was hinting to that very thing earlier. And he's right about creating space. And I really want to touch on the isolation bit, because I do believe that's a very important part of the equation. But that has to be, because we struggle with this at Democracy at Work. There's one particular set of audience members that we can speak to in the realm of education that latch on to it and want it and seek it out. And there's the other side of it where you're not going to convince these people of anything, until there's something that they're given something tangible that represents the process and the effect of it and the benefit for them out of it. And it's hard, but I agree, giving people space. And I think, Rob, you might have missed it. Dave's got a question, and I wanted you to speak about like the concept of isolationism.
Yeah,
you're right.
Pick up on isolationism and alienation, because I think, Shane, thank you for that. Rob, yeah. Because to me, like, again, social ecology has an analysis around that and about, quote, human nature that I think is really worth lifting up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because ultimately, to put the ideas of social ecology into practice, it does call for a system of, community-based assemblies in which we are kind of collectively, democratically deciding on, how we organize society. But if I go and say, I'm starting an assembly, people are going to show up and we're going to realize we don't have any power and are going to be like, well, I went to that and it doesn't work, So, that's how you kind of lose people a little bit. But what I think we're looking to do is build kind of our social ties and our social connections so that when we do form the assembly, we do have power. With the isolation piece, I think, it's really, we haven't seen it like this in really human history, really. People, you go to work, or maybe you work from home, you're in your phone all day, you're in a car, even in the industrial factory system that caused such vast immiseration in, the working class communities in the Gilded Age, when you went home from the factory, like you were re-entering in some ways, pre-capitalist social relations in which you had richly articulated communities, even if there were, extremely, dire conditions. Where today, I think people are really not only untethered from the natural world, but also from their, communities. And that, this is how they make money off of us, because and then they sell us back communities through subscriptions that we don't even own and whatnot. And what the answer to isolation and is collective action, and through organizing at the neighborhood level, whether it's a neighbor union or there's many other approaches that are happening. This is one specific approach to it that organizers in the Pacific Northwest have identified as a strategy, but there's many other ways that folks are approaching this. That I think what we really are trying to do is create space for collective action.
And Rob, what I appreciate about social ecology and about you as a proponent and employee staffer over at the Institute for Social Ecology is the insistence that we look at systems and that we don't just look at individuals or even individual action. Because I'm going to say it, I don't reckon that human beings are fundamentally angelic. I don't reckon that human beings are fundamentally demonic. I think 99% of us basically do what we are conditioned to do and what the systems kind of reward. And the problem is that the current system is incentivizing and rewarding the worst of our instincts. And I appreciate that social ecology says, looky here, y'all, if we incentivize and reward good things will happen. Shane, looky here, Rob, we're coming to the end of the program. So I want to give you a chance to either talk about, like, if there was a question I didn't ask that you thought I would, or anything that you want to conclude with, I want to give you the time and the space to actually share your final thoughts.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And just, to follow up on what you were just saying, I think social ecologists have been always critical about the we that is being invoked when it's saying we're destroying the planet. It's like, I think there's actually a specific, group of people, which are, the Fortune 500s and the people who are running the show that are actually destroying the planet. And the rest of us are just trying to live decent lives and are, try, so, but I would plug, come to the intensive. You'll get a lot of really, really engaging stuff, and it'll be great experience. Check out the Institute or social-ecology.org for a list of our online course offerings. We have a course starting an online course starting on April 15th about the works of Paulo Freire and the MST movement, the landless workers movement in Brazil, that is coming out. We also do reading groups. We have a mentorship program. So I think there's a lot of ways to plug in there and then get involved with your, local community, whether it's a DSA or whether it's a mutual aid group or whether it's, any form of organizing around, and Google Murray Bookchin.
Right on. So listen, Rob Persons, thank you so much for joining us here on Redneck Gone Green. I want to invite y'all next Monday, March 30th, when our guest is going to be Mike Crenshaw from Portland, Oregon. Mike is a hip-hop artist, a culture worker, and a community organizer. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. And in fact, we're going to get a chance to listen to some music, because art and culture, of course, is at the core of anything that we do. I also want to thank Shane for co-hosting this program, as always. Thank Ruthie for her work behind the scenes. But y'all, most importantly, I want to thank you, the viewer, you, the listener. And I'm going to say what I always do, and everybody always say it, but it's really true, y'all. We need you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We need you to join our community at Democracy at Work on YouTube, where we are just one of many programs that the Democracy at Work platform is making available. And you'll hear conversations that the corporate media does not want you to have. What I sometimes call unsanctioned conversations, because we talk to ourselves about what is actually happening in the world, and more importantly, what can be done about it. I also want to invite you to follow me at Redneck Gone Green on Instagram or on Facebook. Sign up to the Substack. Again, I'm going to say it this way, Shane, and invite you to come in if there's anything at Democracy at Work that we need to talk about. Democracy at Work is a local produced program that me and Ruthie and Shane put out every week for you. And this is one of many programs on the Democracy at Work growing platform. And I am looking at it as we, the people, co-creating our own media institution. Shane, is there anything that you wanted to share before we sign off?
Not this week, but coming up at the end of the month, we're going to be releasing recordings of Rick's latest class. That's Professor Richard Wolff's latest Marxian class analysis class. We're going to be releasing those recordings along with all the materials they packaged together to teach the course. We're going to be making those available to people at super cheap, so that later you can sign up for a larger Q&A session with both Professor Wolff and Sharon Azar that have been leading those courses. And that's one of the things we're going to try to keep going in between semesters, I guess, if you want to call it that. So that's about the most exciting thing I can let you guys know about right now. Stay tuned, though.
More to come. And remember, y'all, can't stop, won't stop. Peace.